Hello, my name is Thomas Cunningham. I'm a fleet assistant with COMM, which is an electrical distribution company that serves Chicago and the better part of northern Illinois. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the Northwest Generating Station. Now, the Northwest Generating Station was a coal-fired generating station that stood at the site of my current reporting location and operated between 1912 and 1970. The first thing I'd like to discuss is the planning of the station and projected load growth. Now, the maximum load on the system in 1912 was 200,000 kilowatts, and they had estimated a net increase over a 5-year period that the projected load would be increased by 220,000 kilowatts. Second consideration was land requirements, and it needed to be sufficient to accommodate two 120,000 kilowatt stations, and also coal storage that would be adequate for a 3-day supply of loaded rail cars and 1-day supply for empty cars, which would be used for ash removal. Now, the site selection was another major consideration in the design of the Northwest Generating Station. The first consideration for that was condensing water supply. It needed to be close to a large water supply to be used for condensing water, and that was actually supplied by the Chicago River. The Chicago River, actually the supply was connected through double-deck supply tunnels. The upper pipe was for the outflow and the lower pipe was for the intake. Second consideration would be for railroad access, coal and ash transport and removal. Also, an elevated spur line needed to be constructed to connect the property with the Chicago Northwestern rail line, which right now actually the remains of the old line are still visible at the corner of Elson Avenue and Whipple Street in Chicago. Another thing was ample acreage. They needed enough space for the generating station, so they chose the site of the old Bickerdike farm. There was a total of 75 acres, bounded by the north branch to the east, and Kimball Avenue to the west, Edison Street to the north, and Roscoe Street to the south. Another consideration was proximity to load. Now, proximity to load used to be the most important consideration. Now that there were recent advances at this time in high voltage transmission, it wasn't necessary for the load to be very close to the generating station. So at this point, this is the fourth consideration for the site selection. Another thing I'd like to talk about is the engineering of the station. And the first building that I'd like to talk about is the powerhouse building, which housed the turbine generator room. And within the turbine generator room, there were 6 Curtis vertical steam turbines. Each had 20,000 kilowatts, operated at 750 RPM. The turbine room was finished in Tiffany white enameled brick, which I was actually able to unearth a piece of that in the back, and this is a piece of the Tiffany white enameled brick. If you can see that, I don't know how well you can see that, but this is left over from the demolition of the site, and some of these artifacts are still there, which is pretty cool, I think. Anyway, generators were mounted above the turbines. Generators were 25 hertz, 3-phase, 4,500 volt generators with 4 poles and a revolving field. The boiler room was also part of the powerhouse. There were a total of 60 boilers. 10 boilers were corresponding to each turbine generator unit. There's a set of 10 boilers served by tile-lined steel stack, 17 feet inside diameter and 270 feet height. The transformer house contained step-up transformers, which would take the voltage that was generated at 4,500 volts, step that up to 9,000 volts. These transformers were water and oil cooled. They contained 1,700 gallons of oil and were over 99% efficient. The switch house was another building on the site, and the first floor housed the bus bars, cables, and generator leads. Second floor housed the oil switches, and the third floor, the instrument transformers. After a while, the Northwest Generating Station actually became obsolete, and around 1970 it was dismantled, decommissioned, and eventually demolished. At that time, nuclear power was coming into being at that point, and a lot more utility companies were headed in that direction, so the need for this station was no longer there. Actually, Commonwealth Edison had the first privately funded nuclear power station, which was the Dresden station in southwest of Chicago, Illinois, about 60 miles southwest of Chicago, Illinois. And also another consideration for decommissioning the Northwest Generating Station was the coal and all the pollution that the coal produced at that point in time. And at this point, the station was no longer needed. When it was first built, the station actually was at the edge of Chicago at that point. Western Avenue was the west portion, or the west end of Chicago, and this station was built a little bit west of there. So today that concludes my presentation about the Northwest Generating Station. I hope you found it a little bit helpful and informative, and I appreciate you listening to me today. Thank you very much.